Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. Today we are building this 1 to 72nd scale mouse tool from Vespid models. Now this is quite an unusual version of the mouse, but I think it looks pretty cool and I've been wanting to build it for quite a long time, so I'm really excited to try it today and see how one of the first Vespid models compares to the newest ones. As you can see, the model is really big. It's the biggest one that I've ever had in this scale, excluding all the planes and bigger scale tanks. So let's get right into building it. I start the assembly by cutting out all of the little wheels. There is a lot of tiny wheels that then get to put onto tiny little bogies, and once you have a shit ton of bogies, those that get applied to sort of like bogie holders, and then those bogie holders can be finally put onto the tank. So the suspension is quite very complicated, and it's probably the most wheel heavy suspension out there. And I really can't imagine trying to fix this in the field, especially with the tank being so heavy. I decided to put all of the tracks onto the model right away. Well, I didn't put all the tracks on, just the lower run, because the upper run would have been basically pointless, and I also wanted some spare tracks for the later stowage. I did apply them because you can't really keep the upper parts removable for easier painting, and since this is such a like blocky model, I wasn't really worried about painting these parts even with everything glued together. There is a few footage parts on the model, only the grills for the front, so you glue them from the underneath, which is kind of weird, but I guess this is how it was done in real life, which basically means they're almost impossible to see, but they're still quite a nice inclusion, so I made sure that I added them, because this is the most acceptable PE, is not hard to do, and it adds a lot to the model. After a state-of-the-art Peter unfocused video, we can move on to assembling the very blocky hull. Now there are some gaps here when you try to put this together. However, if you apply some pressure and you use quick drying glue, this can be eliminated pretty easily. Quick drying glue is just perfect for this. I decided to use a figure because I bought some figures for dioramas but never did the dioramas, and I thought, why don't I start adding figures to some tanks to give them some more life, and here it shows the huge size of the tank, so I decided to use it. Then I just continued adding a lot of the tiny parts together onto the blocky hull. There isn't a lot to talk about because it's really just hatches and nothing else, since it's just a square, and it's gonna be interesting to try and paint interestingly. Anyway, after assembling the Mouse 2 turret, or the E100 turret, whatever you want, it was time for some stowage, because I wanted to make this model look like it was actually used. Now I know that it's really popular to make models of these super heavy tanks as if they were pushed into service in factory colors, but I wanted to make it look like it was pushed into service normally, with normal camouflage and stowage like the tank was lived in. So I started by adding some spare tracks onto the turret. This was inspired by the King Tiger, of course. I didn't want them to look like they were welded onto the turret, so I cut off some little parts of sprue and I put them into the holes on the tracks to make it look like there are hooks holding the tracks on the turret, which is, in my opinion, something that probably would have been done, because the mouse we have right now is really early version of the tank. Like, it was already produced and it was meant to go into battle. But if you look at first versions of Tiger, for example, it has no stowage bins, no nothing, because they didn't think of that just yet. But I wanted this model to look more used, so I decided to add on some stowage bins, because I can't really think of many places where you would store your personal belongings on this tank, apart from the interior, of course. So I started adding some stowage bins onto the turret. Now these are upside down stowage bins from a Panther. I did want to make them look like they were part of the tank. These were the only ones that I had spare. I know that it would be more realistic if these were like Tiger stowage bins or Panzer IV stowage bins, but Panther stowage bins looked pretty good to me. I put them on upside down, and that's why I created fake like hatches for them as well, so it actually looks like they open up, and I added them onto the sides of the turret, and I think they add a lot to the tank. I also decided to make little sort of stowage shelves on the back by putting on some like squares of plastic. Then I added some stowage onto those, namely few jerry cans. Stowaging is quite a lot of fun, I've realized recently. I think it adds a lot of life to the model, because if you have a bare model, it doesn't tell much. Like, you can make it really interesting. I would never say that a bare model can't be interesting, but stowage adds something to the model that the crew would add, and you know, it's a bit more interesting. Like for example here, the ladder, because you know, it's a tall tank, you would need a ladder to get up. Here you can see me using some green stuff putty to make some tarps, again covered in finger marks, just like on the Churchill. I've since learned to avoid this, but here I've still made the same mistake. But what I didn't do was make them unrealistic. By that I mean I created some strap downs to make them seem like they are being held down. Then it was time to start spraying the model with quite a lot of paint. I started by adding a black primer. Black primer is basically used to unify all of the different colors of different materials together, and also create a grippy color surface for the later colors to adhere to. I decided to do the German octopus camouflage, so I started by spraying the model with a olive green from AK 3rd Gen range. I basically sprayed the entire model with this color. However, the black primer helped me with some hard to reach areas, because it created a nice fake shadow there instead of leaving the plastic bare. Then I started pulse shading this model, because it's quite important, especially here, since it's just a square basically. Pulse shading is basically a technique that you use to enhance the three-dimensional look of the tank and highlight some parts that are on the upper surfaces of the tank to make them visually lighter, since in smaller scale your model looks way darker than it actually is. I do pulse shading by adding buff into the mixture of colors or light, and I start spraying towards the middle of panels if it's a horizontal part of the tank, and towards the upper surfaces if it's a vertical part of the tank. As you can see in the video, I spray the model with several layers of the highlights. First I go with a mid-tone and then I lighten it and lighten it. This is a technique that I like to overdo sort of, because I want it to be visible at the end, and it's hard to see if it's mild and you know, not too contrasty after all of the weathering techniques cover it all up. Then I start spraying the second layer of the camouflage. This is Duncan Gelb, again from AK 3rd Gen, acrylic colors. I used sticky tack to create the camouflage, and it actually proved to be pretty easy. And again, I post shaded these parts without the masking tape, so it doesn't seem like it's just squared in with the post shades, but it actually looks natural across the entire model, because the camouflage is still part of the same tank. It's not like the camouflage should have its own properties compared to the other color of the camouflage. I then used a very thin brush to paint on some circles. This is the thing about octopus camouflage that I found pretty interesting. I scraped some of them up, but not all of them. I was pretty happy with how it ended up looking. Moving on, I started painting all of the tiny little details. The tarp on the front of the gun and all of the other tarps got different colors of green and brown and buff. And I made sure that I post shade them as well with a thinned down acrylic color, just with a brush this time. Picking out all of the details. I don't really have a good life hack to how a tarp should be post shaded. I just do what I think looks good. The tow hooks on the side got a grey color. And to create some base layers for rusty areas, I painted the tracks with a brown color. This was probably leather brown. I say probably because I've recorded this so long ago already. This was also applied onto the tracks on the whole. I started painting the figure. Now I decided to use the glazing method because since my Tiger Gruppe Furman video, I haven't painted a figure, and since then I've learned a lot of stuff and I wanted to try and implement it on this figure. So what I did was I base coated it with black, then I sprayed on a light color from the top. Usually it's white, but I used buff because I remember Night Shift using buff as well because it seems more natural. And also I had it in the airbrush from the second layer of the camouflage, so I just used it for that. And I basically used really thinned down color of what I wanted to do on the areas, basically layering it on, since it's thin and it went down into the crevices. It created shadows there, and it when it like set on the highlighted areas, it looked more highlighted there. So it was pretty easy. However, I guess the black German uniform isn't the easiest to work with, but it did work pretty well. However, I decided to also highlight it with my brush normally, since I'm quite used to doing it this way as well. This really pulled everything together. I used buff for the face, you're basically doing the exact same thing. First some normal glazes and then highlighting with a thin brush and a really light color. And I'm pretty happy with this figure, and I think it looks pretty good on the tank. So after giving it a flat coat of varnish, started adding the wash to pick out all of the tiny little details. This is a really transformative technique because it not only picks out all of the tiny details, but it also kind of acts like the first layer of weathering in a sort of a way, if you want it to act like that. But I haven't figured out how to clean it up enough so it doesn't act like that, so I just use the fact that it leaves stains for weathering. This is an enamel wash, that's why I had to varnish the model, and I use an enamel thinner to thin the wash and also to clean it off from the tank, and also create these streaks, for example, which is just a streak of the wash, and then I blend it with the thinner. Then I wanted to start chipping. I wanted to try a technique I haven't tried in a really long time, and it is sponge chipping. And let me tell you, this is an amazing technique, and I don't understand why I've never used it. I do love chipping with a brush because it gives me more control, but if you use a small enough sponge, you can create such realistic chips that it's ridiculous, and it's really good. And for those who don't know, sponge chipping is basically a technique where you dip a sponge into color, then you unload most of the color, like 90% onto a paper or a napkin, and then you dab the surface, which creates tiny little chips on the entire surface. They look really realistic. This is, I think, my first ever model that genuinely looks like it's made out of metal. I don't think I've ever achieved that kind of the look, and I'm really happy. But we can enhance it, and I enhanced it by adding some more chipping. First of all, I added some light chips. And then I went over all of the chips with a rusty wash that I then blended around. I also used it to create rust streaks by basically just making a streak with the wash and then thinning it into a thin stripe of rust, which looks pretty good, pretty convincing. I'm really happy with how this effect turned out. And with this effect, it was basically time for the last pieces of weathering. Now, since I still wanted to base it somewhat in reality, would expect this tank to fight in Berlin, so I didn't do much weathering at all. I only sprayed a simple dust wash and the model was done. So, time for the spinny bit. So, my mouse is now finished. I am really happy with how it turned out. I think it looks really good. It's probably my best model, but of course you have to tell me that down in the comments. And while you're there, why don't you subscribe? Help me reach 1000 subscribers before the end of the summer. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. I know I did building this model. There is a lot of other models coming as well over the next few weeks. I really like the inclusion of the figure. I generally am really pleased with what I managed to achieve here. So again, I would like to thank you all for subscribing who has. Thank you all for watching this video and getting this far. I really hope that you enjoyed it and learned something new for your modeling skills. So yeah, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!